and they don't recognize that they just did that. And that would be called voluntary jurisdiction, and thus consent. This is why you hear very often politicians who know about the corruption or the potential of corruption say, they'll make this statement: people get the government they deserve. What he's saying is that the people, through whether there's ignorance or whether they're traitors at heart, are given voluntary jurisdiction to a corrupt and non-jurisdictional party who is exercising de facto venues under the guise of government, and thus are consenting to their enslavement, while turning around, then starting organizations and marching all over the place, making fools of themselves, not getting justice, because it hasn't dawned on them that they're dealing with a totally de facto platform that has no lawful jurisdiction whatsoever, but they keep volunteering into the false jurisdiction. Their estates and their property immediately goes into probate, because they then turn around and refer to themselves as persons of color, which takes them out of the political platforms of civilized government, and they've just declared that they're artificial persons, and therefore the occupiers are using their artificial person corporation in first person to the persons who now are artificial as first persons and are claiming jurisdictional authority over them as an estate. This is what reversion of estate actually is. And this is the basis on how they've been actually gentrifying communities, and they've been doing it constantly. And rather than our people talk about and study jurisdiction, they will follow the training line. And this is the training line for rats and imbeciles: racism, prejudice in our communities. And as soon as they go there, now they're back into the hands of Carlos Linnaeus and the U.S. Census Bureau for stock, because they just agreed to be stock in the U.S. corporation, which is a corporation, not a country. Now they are stock, and now the owners of the stock can create new bonds and issue new bonds. So I guarantee you, they're going to be looking for new stock and putting a census out under the Carlos Linnaeus paradigm of race. And the people who don't understand jurisdiction are going to sign those instruments and perpetrate fraud against themselves, and then start complaining again because they don't understand jurisdiction. Now, that's a fact.
So how do we get out from under that jurisdiction?
Now, it's called averment of jurisdiction. So now you're talking about, we back to, I told people, write these things down, territorial jurisdiction. If you ask the people listening now, and many people who have been taking our people and taking finance from them and organizing institutions and marching them around on the land, complaining about due process and complaining about justice and arguing racism, if you ask them what is territorial jurisdiction, how many of them will give you a clear, definitive, and competent answer? Because that's part of what they're dealing with. How many of them will deal with in personam jurisdiction? Because that's what they're dealing with. And how many of them will deal or address to these people subject matter jurisdiction? Because exactly what they're dealing with, all of those things. And then you're dealing with the problem of voluntary jurisdiction, dealing with misrepresentation and non-consent, and these people's rights and liberties are in probate while they're marching and praying all over the place. And it is a known fact what I'm saying. I'm not talking opinion. This is known fact. And then they believe that these people who are marching them all over the place are jurisdictionally competent. I don't condemn them. I will say, let the people learn what jurisdiction is, and the people themselves will start straightening this stuff up. But if they insist on playing this game of race and color games and prejudice and marching around the place making themselves fools and don't understand jurisdiction, because when they do that, they're in a false foreign alien jurisdiction. And keep in mind, foreign in law does not mean distance. in the aggregate format. And most people think it means distance, aggregate distance geographically. And that is an aspect of foreign, but that is not political jurisdiction foreign. And people need to know this because that's what's been going on. Really, and the interesting thing is what we're talking about right now is really not unknown. It is clearly known. And those who are violating you every day in the name of racism and in the name of courts and in the name of city operatives and in the names of the gangs of New York pretending to be officers of law, calling themselves their most recent operations of being commercial mercenaries known as the Fraternal Order of Police, etc., are knowingly operating in a politically foreign jurisdiction, and that they themselves are foreign by law foreign, and foreign to the Constitution that granted them no jurisdictional powers whatsoever, and the treaties that supersede the Constitution that disallows such activities on the land and against the people. And no one's been challenging it. They've been sitting around talking the controlled argument, race. Oh, they're racist. Oh, they took our sandwiches and stuff. They won't give us a peanut butter sandwich with jelly on it like they gave everybody else. Let us march and let us pray. And they start that. And of course, at that point, they're volunteering into a false jurisdiction, a foreign jurisdiction, abandoning the platforms of treaties and constitutions which were in place to protect them and secure their rights in these matters. And they now volunteer themselves under a color of law and under ignorance into a foreign jurisdiction. And now, again, they are stock of the corporate operatives of the United States corporate company, which is a foreign jurisdiction, and the operatives of it are in breach of Constitution and treaty because they're not a party to it, nor are people of color because they're off the platform of civilized, organized government. Why? The Constitution for the United States is derived from Muslim law, and it's derived from the treaties, the mother treaty, commonly known as the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, Treaty of Algiers, the Treaty of Tripoli, etc. These collectively are known as the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with the Moroccan Empire and Great Britain. And the United States Corporation Company is a subdivisional corporate entity, colony, business of Great Britain and not a country. And those such persons who own it have been in rebellion, etc., against Britain. Therefore, they are de facto on multiple levels. However, what they have done have entrenched themselves and create what you call a private military arsenal operations. And this is why they have corporate, what they call military bases in roughly around 189 countries around the world to maintain the false pretext and the false platform of these false jurisdictions. And this is the common source of the world's problems today. Not that there aren't other problems coming from other political jurisdictions, but that is in fact what the source of your economic, social, and political problems are right now, and your jurisdictional problems in relationship to a lack of due process, a lack of justice. You'll hear our people constantly talking about no justice, no peace, yet they will not acknowledge the treaties and the constitutions that were set in place on their behalf by their forefathers, who are Moors, and they would prefer to call themselves Negroes, Blacks, and Coloreds, which are brand systems of the owners of the United States Service Corporation Company under colonial operations. Those things that I just stated are provable facts, and thus come under what is called consent via voluntary jurisdictions, and thus are taken outside of the human family, and of the protections of international law, because they themselves deny nationality, thus deny national laws and international laws that were put in place to secure their rights, not give them rights. And so now what we're dealing with is a whole body of people operating under false jurisdictions. All of their estates, their rights and their liberties are in probate jurisdiction without their knowledge of it. And they're arguing skin complexion and racism, which is a paradigm set up by Frederick Johann Blumenbach and Carlos Linnaeus and used in the U.S. corporation human trafficking venue, census, etc. That's a fact.
I have some questions. I'm going to take some questions.
Go ahead.
Here's a question. Is there another power that can challenge them, and I guess it says, and is willing to, a nation that is under treaty, i.e. an ally?
Well, of course, that's what you're supposed to do. Now, here we go, jurisdiction. So now, yes, you're correct in the question. The question is valid. Now, name the parties in treaty specifically. And if you start talking about people of color, you're already, and by law, you can't even open your mouth because it wouldn't concern you. Now, name the nation states, name the treaties, and then name the sections of the treaties that are in breach or violation. That's where you begin. That's the power. But I'm presenting this to you and this question to you. Have you been seeing the so-called persons of color leader guys having this kind of conversation in relationship to jurisdiction? In relationship to enforcing the treaties, because that's the venue. Though that's the jurisdiction that the arguments are made when abridgments of people's rights and liberties are concerned, when due process of law is concerned, when justice is executed under law is concerned, you're talking political jurisdictions. Why are they not talking jurisdictions? Well, you can determine yourself after you do a little bit of study whether or not they've been honest with you. Or whether or not some of these people you've trusted are actually compromised extremely. Okay. Subject matter jurisdiction. As a reminder, now those of you who've been listening, I trust that you wrote down some of the aspects of jurisdiction that we presented to you because it's very important. And some of the questions that might arise with you will be, you'll answer them yourselves, truthfully, once you start analyzing. And but of import at the moment, the people need to understand that all estates, etc. And this is particular with those who have been recently arguing the issue of birth certificates, claiming the birth, this type of thing. What you have is the operations of the foreign de facto operatives of the United States Service Corporation actually doing human trafficking, and then claiming jurisdiction, aggregate territorial jurisdiction, which doesn't exist with them, and judicial jurisdiction, which doesn't exist with them, and exercising power of what is known as eminent domain by claiming people's estates and property, which would be called probate. And so that now you're dealing with probate jurisdiction. Those are on the immediate term, the subject matters that you're dealing with. You're not dealing with racism. You're dealing with political jurisdictions. Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Addie Simmons, what's the end game during and after the Trump administration for Moors?
Well, what you see right now, and I've told people for the last 3 or 4 years since Donald J. Trump, took the position with the bankrupt United States Corporation, Human Trafficking Corporation company, with the promise of the quote that you hear him say, "Making America Great Again." Now you must be cognizant of what is America and then what is United States Service Corporation, which are two distinctions. So now that's a commitment in relationship to the corporate activity on the land America. Now you're going to have to make in both your mind and in your political speech and speaking, a distinction between America and the United States Corporation Company that the people have been falsely, back to our beginning of our conversation, owners have been caught falsely claiming to be Americans. You're not talking about the same thing. Now, Donald J. Trump is, as we talked and told the people 3 years ago, put in place by some military operatives of the defunct United States Service Corporation Company, who've been trying to restore the republic platform of governance under a treaty and constitution established, operated at North America, which actually had been overthrown. And by one of the methodologies by which the owners of the criminal enterprise known as the United States has been operating, to the point that not only have they been raping and murdering people around the world, they start murdering the people of the land and stealing their property. And to the point that now many of the hybrid Europeans who have been for decades and the last couple centuries, the beneficiaries of the reconstruction of the history at and on the land jurisdiction of North America, and have gone along with the false paradigm. Now knowing and noticing that they've been losing their estates and their jobs and their accounts, etc., you'll see and will be seeing more of them tell the truth. However, they're still, for the most part, having claims or jurisdictional claims on estates, or the source from which their estates were evolved by profit, on estates that were not and are not and never were theirs in the first instance, upon which their wealth was built. So their wealth was built under false pretexts in the first instance. And this is back to people understanding jurisdiction. Now, in relationship to starting to fix this thing, we're going to have to start talking the original, that's another phrase, original jurisdictions. So now you're talking about natural persons, natural people distinguished from artificial persons. And then now you're talking about estates, reversion of estates, and trust. This is the area that you're going to be making your discussions and your research when you're talking about remedies in this area. And when you're talking about exercising powers, or what you would be saying, what other powers, now you're talking in jurisdiction, because jurisdiction in law actually means power, or the power to act. And so you need to understand the synonyms of jurisdiction, etc. And this is why over the years, we've taken multiple opportunities at different times to express the issue of reversion of estates, trust, because everything is operating in trust and in contract law, etc. But what you have, the problem that you have, is you have a de facto criminal enterprise operations of criminal foreign persons claiming to be Americans who have entrenched themselves and have actually been attacking the people. This is what's going on. And back to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's assignment, one of his assignments, is, and assignments in this relationship, to restore the credibility of legitimate governing operations, even though it was already abandoned, you get the point, of the defunct United States Republic, the original republic under treaty and constitution, distinguished from the U.S. corporate operatives of human trafficking and those platforms, which have been in operation since 1862. That's just simply the fact. And they're official, which we've told you over and over again. Most of you know, this is for those who don't know, to give you references so that you can examine some of the things that we're saying and refine your view on what we're saying and make yourself more competent. So now you're dealing with what we've told you continuously over and over again. The Organic Act of Congress, February the 2nd, 1871. And this is important for you to understand because they've created another foreign jurisdiction, but they also named it the United States. You know, and people don't know that these are actually different corporate entities, and three of them are all de facto, and which is another a reason why the impostoring persons who are actually vested members of the Roman Curia and board are actually on the board of directors and members of the Circle Church and Chancery, which you have been calling congressmen and senators, etc. And you'll notice that they will never bring up the subject matter in the Constitution for the United States of the nobility clause, and also the fact that persons of the Circle Church and Chancery by law were never to hold office under the legitimate republic operations of the United States of America, republic operating under treaty law, and that's the basis of their legitimacy. You will never hear them talking about that. And you'll never hear persons call themselves people of color who have been pretending to love people of African descent, Asiatic Africans who have been abused under the Spanish Inquisition, and pretend that they're arguing their rights. You will see them always, 90% of the time, bring up 14th Amendment civil rights persons, not knowing that that's actually corporate stock. They know it is, but I'm saying that the people have not been aware that that's corporate stock for the United States Corporation Company. Of course, logically, ultimately, they get no remedy and they get no justice because it wasn't structured for that. It was structured to deceive. And again, here we go again, the importance of comprehending really jurisdiction. And it can't be emphasized enough. However, I also know that if we could get more people, because we know a lot of you out there have been studying over the years, but we've also been experiencing opposition from people on our side of the nation who should have actually been teaching the people this, who, for whatever reason, and I'm not condemning them, they made their choices to hide this information, to attack those persons like myself who've been teaching people civics, who did not want this information out, who have corporate construct jurisdictional issues themselves called 501c3s, corporate entities, corporately registered under the corporate municipals, corporations and the municipal states, all of which they are known to be de facto. And logically, what happens is that the people's estates go automatically into probate jurisdiction. And of course, then the persons who own the corporate states, etc., operations have been stealing their property, their accounts, their lands, their houses, etc., and gentrifying their communities under probate jurisdiction. Now, that is the truth. So I'm saying that to say this, we need to, and there's other information that logically will accompany this information. We need to do as much as we can to get our people civically cognizant and civically competent so that we can start addressing, exercising power that you already have, that you have not been using, to counter, or what you call make averment or averment claims against the false claims of jurisdiction. Because keep this in mind when you're looking at House Joint Resolution 192, etc., and the things that took place even with Woodrow Wilson in 1913, is that they created a false foreign jurisdiction, gave it the air of legitimacy, created false or counterfeit, and have been calling it money in violation of the Constitution, and actually created false foreign alien jurisdictions for these private commercial instruments, etc., and then use color of law to enforce them, And that's what you're suffering from. You're not suffering from racism. You're suffering from color of law and the assumed jurisdiction in foreign jurisdictions and all property thereafter of persons who agree to be colored come under what is known as jurisdictional probate, which is what's been happening. And of course, they use that as a basis to falsely exercise power called eminent domain, which can only be done by nationals, and is actually done by persons who own foreign corporations who are foreign corporate entities themselves, and they have been exercising jurisdictional powers over the people's physical persons, over the subject matters, and over the territories of the land. And the persons who've been marching our people around will not tell them the truth, that that's where their problem is. They'll start talking about skin color, which is another false jurisdiction. It's what it is. Don't get mad, get wise. And I'm not attacking your marching, praying leader guide, so don't go there. Let the knowledge expose them for who they really are. But I bet you they're not poor. I bet you they got trusts unbeknownst to you. I bet you they got so-called multi-million-dollar planes to go all around the place to keep promoting what they themselves know is a fraud. And they use different versions of gods to do it. Whatever version, what flavor god you into? Which one of the other gods that's really the other god, that's the real god of the other god that you're talking about, that's the real one, that's whose jurisdiction you're claiming to be under. This is what's going on. And that's not an insult, I'm just telling you the truth. And you need to start facing the truth, that we collectively have demonstrated severe, violently severe incompetence to our injury in the process.
So, some questions?
Now, while Dr. Naila is reading some of the questions, I'm going to go over jurisdiction of subject matter as an example. So jurisdiction of subject matter means jurisdiction of the class of cases to which particular cases belong. And so whenever there's different subject matters, whether you're dealing with estate, land, trust, all these things are always in operation, etc. The subject matter would be the classification of the cases either litigated or in litigation based on national and international law, i.e. treaties and international intercourse and interchange, etc., by which these things can be settled. And thus, averments of jurisdictions and quo warrantos are common in order for these things to be resolved. This is why those of you who have any basic knowledge of organized government and civilization and jurisprudence know that persons or people who do not have a nationality or have been stripped of their nationality are not afforded proper venue by which to argue their issues or their cases, because 90% of them do not understand jurisdiction and therefore are tagged already as minority or incompetent. And then, of course, they put them in the foreign jurisdiction under a representative of the Roman Curia via the foreign jurisdiction of the barristers, British accredited registry, Bar Association, in violation of treaty and in violation of Constitution for the United States, and thus being officers of the private foreign courts of the Circle Church and Chancery, take leave over the people's estates and then deliver them to the states, and then by eminent domain claim sovereign jurisdiction over their property and thus gentrify targeted neighborhoods. That, what I just told you, is how it's done and why it's done. Examine it and you'll see for yourself. And I guarantee you, after you do some serious examination, if you continue to follow people, keep talking about marching and praying all over the place and talking about racism, then you are choosing a position that I guarantee will not come out in your best interest.